Hello, sir.
Hello, Akshat.
Now, sir, we all know what's been happening in the Middle East over the past few days. But, sir, before you sort of dissect what's been happening, I just wanted to ask you, is this a failure of the diplomatic channels available?
The feeling I get is perhaps diplomacy was not even given a serious enough chance. We don't know precisely what transpired, but from the few whispers that emerged from Oman, which was acting as an intermediary,
Yes.
it looks like there was a realistic possibility of diplomatic breakthrough. What probably happened, I'm presuming now, President Trump made up his mind after the terrible disaster that happened in terms of persecution of innocent citizens, killing up to 30,000 innocent people because they were merely peacefully protesting about the economic conditions. And earlier, of course, killing of women who were protesting about extremely rigid conditions about hijab, etc. This is unacceptable. I think the American establishment, President Trump in particular, was deeply upset, and he made a statement in those days, if you remember, a couple of months ago, that help is on the way. So I think he was determined to teach a lesson. So my feeling is probably diplomacy was not given adequate chance. If the purpose is to actually ensure that nuclearization will not happen, I don't know what exactly transpired. As I said, we do not know. One day I think it will be revealed. But they did not give that negotiation an adequate chance. Because ultimately, if nuclearization is stopped, what is required? That Iran in perpetuity would give up enrichment beyond what is required for legitimate energy needs. Typically 3.5% uranium enrichment is required. Iran enriched up to 60% in some cases, and there is absolutely no use for high-grade uranium like that except for weapons. Supposing Iran actually agreed to a deal that they will never ever go for enrichment beyond 3.5%, and what is enriched already, either they will surrender or they will dilute it so that it comes back to the minimum level required for atomic energy. And three, there will be verifiability, permanent access to international community to ensure that they comply with the norms. These are the three things required about nuclearization. But if the goal is regime change, then no matter what negotiations there are, you cannot negotiate with a regime to destroy itself.
Yeah.
So probably they had the goal of regime change. Therefore, negotiation was merely a ruse. Probably Israel did not want to ever trust or could not ever trust Iran, because Iran was calling for the demise of Israel as a nation, the destruction of Israel as a nation. There was never a case after the Second World War, after the founding of the United Nations, that a country officially and repeatedly, a sovereign country, repeatedly called for the destruction of countries, in this case, death to America, death to Israel, and the complete elimination of a country, in this case, Israel, repeatedly, officially.
Yeah.
And probably Israel felt that with a regime like that in place, they would never be secure. So I don't think war was inevitable if the objective was to denuclearize or to prevent acquisition of nuclear weapons. But if regime change was the objective, war was inevitable.
Well, the debate on the US and Israeli actions apart, the war also marks the end of one of the most brutal, bigoted, and tyrannical regimes in contemporary history, that of Iranian Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei. So, we would just want to know your thoughts on that, sir.
Iran's is a saga of tragedies. You must remember, we're dealing with a country which is half the size of India physically. India's geographic size is about 3.2 million square kilometers. Iran is roughly half of it, 1.6 million square kilometers. It's a big country. The population is about 93 million. I think the only other Islamic or Muslim country which has a population somewhat equivalent, the only two other countries, one is in East Asia or Southeast Asia, Indonesia, and then Pakistan. These are the two. Among the Arab countries, or countries west of Iran, the only other country that can match is probably Egypt. In Africa, Nigeria. So it's a big country, about 93 million population. But more important, it's a country with a long history and civilization. 2,500 years, 3,000 years history and known history and civilization. If you remember, when Alexander became Alexander the Great, what was the first great conquest, war of conquest? He defeated Darius, the Persian emperor. And that changed history. So right from those days, Iran is a country of civilization. Unlike many other Arab countries, it is a liberal country, relatively speaking, an evolved country, a well-educated country with good infrastructure, where in general, other religious faiths could coexist. But such a country, unfortunately, a series of mishaps happened. In the 1950s itself, I think it was late 1950s, probably around 1959 or so, Iran by that time already had a parliament, elected by the people, probably limited electorate, but elected by the people. And there was an opposition, so there was a system in place. And the king did not have absolute power. He exercised some powers. So a man called Mossadegh became the prime minister. He set out to nationalize the British oil companies. Britain took umbrage. Now, Mossadegh was a genuine progressive in his country, had popular appeal, but because that was just early years after the Second World War and after decolonization in the rest of the world, the British felt outraged and they wanted to bring down Mossadegh at any cost. America was unwilling at that time. Eisenhower was the president in the United States, 1950s. But Britain twisted America's arm. Finally, they together used an intelligence operation to discredit Mossadegh. They forced the Shah, who was very reluctant, Shah Ahmad Raja Pahlavi, who was reluctant because he understood the implications. He was not very keen. But they forced the Shah to remove Mossadegh. And they prevented Mossadegh from contesting elections again. Why this history is important is, whenever you go for economic reform and modernization, particularly in traditional societies, or any society for that matter, there's going to be some amount of unrest. Economic reform brings about winners and losers in the short term. Not everybody can participate in the economic activity in the same manner. Now, unless you bring about some kind of a rapprochement, unless the losers are given some space in the form of welfare, training, skills, better opportunities, whatever, and unless to articulate the angst of the losers, there is a secular, ready political platform available, there could be tragedy happening. Now, had Mossadegh been allowed to continue to have viable political platform, the anger against modernization embarked upon by the Shah of Iran, and he did modernize. Whatever be the problems of monarchy, he did modernize. Infrastructure, defense modernization, education, from religious tolerance point of view, dress code, etc. Islam itself becoming softer and much more humane and modern. So in every which way, the society was getting modernized. And there are going to be some resistance. When normal democratic secular alternative is not available, you crushed it. The only thing available is religious alternative. Throughout the world, just take two examples. Take Hitler's Germany. The only organized group that was allowed to function once they basically decided not to oppose Hitler or fascism or the Nazi party was the Christian church. Because it's not worthwhile to attack the Christian church and crush it unless the regime feels threatened by it. Take erstwhile Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc. Take East Germany. The communist regimes, once there is an understanding that the church would not go against communism or the state, they let the church do its own thing. So East Germany is a great example. I visited Leipzig immediately after the Berlin Wall fell. Leipzig was an East German city. There was a priest there who was giving sermons every week on Sundays, and he used very cleverly Jesus' teachings, the teachings of the Holy Bible, without talking of Communist Party specifically, but allegorically, he was trying to undermine the Communist Party's philosophy and its governance. People understood that. So thousands upon thousands started attending from all over East Germany. Every Sunday, I think he had the mass and the sermons, and thousands of people flocked. The church could not accommodate, and therefore they used to have the microphones all over the city, the megaphones all over the city, and people used to congregate in large numbers. The Communist Party did not know how to deal with that because they are not overtly opposing Communist Party, but they were still spreading the message of dissent, and ultimately that led to the fall of the Berlin Wall. So what happens is, whenever you don't allow the legitimate space for a normal secular political platform to oppose the establishment in complex situations like this, the initiative might sometimes go to religious platform. And therefore, whatever anger was there against the Shah of Iran, because of monarchy, because of some amount of tyranny, but most of all, because of the modernization process, it was all captured by the Islamic clergy. And that's how Ayatollah Khamenei in 1979, the Islamic Revolution, Shah fled the country, and Khomeini took over. Once they took over, what is the legitimacy? The Quran, Prophet Muhammad's teachings. And once the teachings in the harshest form are embraced, without any discrimination, without any space for modernization, what appeared to be revolutionary initially becomes utterly exploitative, corrupt, tyrannical. That's exactly what happened to that regime. As long as the revolutionary order was undiminished, they could mobilize the masses. But over time, they crushed the people in a ruthless manner. For instance, instead of focusing on the welfare of the people, they have taken over the government. They should have focused on the welfare of the Iranian people. Instead of that, extremely strict religious code to subjugate women. Though Iran, let me again reiterate, is not as harsh as many other Islamic countries were. But relative to what they enjoyed, those freedoms, the harshness. And then, instead of focusing on internal matters and their economic conditions and prosperity, the first thing they did was they went and occupied the American embassy, held them for more than a year or so as prisoners. And that's the proximate reason why Jimmy Carter lost that election in 1980 and Ronald Reagan became the president, because the American president was humiliated. And it was a tremendous diplomatic faux pas. It never happened in history. Even Hitler never occupied the embassies of the adversaries, British or American or some other country. Never. So things even Hitler did not do. A civilized country in the post-Second World War world, a country that's an adherent to the United Nations Charter, did it. So it's an enormous thing in terms of international diplomacy. And then going after Israel, death to Israel. And Israel must be extinguished. If you accept Israel as a nation, as the United Nations accepted, but if you fight for the Palestinian right for self-determination and the statehood of Palestine, that is a position that most countries in the world, including India, took. In fact, several Israeli governments took that position. American government took that position. You could be a little more strong in your voice. But Israel must disappear, and death to Israel. And our goal is to destroy Israel. And along with that, death to the great Satan, America. Consistently as public policy, as government's official policy. It's not a fringe element that is talking about destruction of these two countries. And then, as state policy creating terror outfits, Hezbollah, Hamas, and we all know what Hamas did, October 7th. Then the Houthis in Yemen, and the Muslim Brotherhood in Syria and elsewhere, arming them publicly, repeatedly. They actually talked about their access of power.
Yes.
And creating terrorism officially. So you take the totality of it, they're sadly, extremely heinous regime, a regime that took over with such great hope and expectation. It was more than tyrannical.
Right.
It gave no space to Iranian society. A proud and very progressive society was reduced to penury and shame and indignity and subjugation. So nobody should hold any brief for them. But the challenge is this the best way to go forward? What is the benefit, what is the loss to international community? Can you with impunity go and assassinate the head of a state, however much you detest them, without the United Nations Security Council approval? In a world where we all accept that the national boundaries are sacrosanct, that is a question. But the second operational challenge is, no matter how much you bomb Iran, I do not know what the future is going to foretell. If regime change does not take place, it is the worst of both the worlds. You have violated all canons of international diplomacy and behavior between states, acceptable canons of behavior, and yet you have not achieved the practical objective that we set out. So let's see how things evolve.
Now, so much has been spoken about whether the US was right, whether Iran was right, whether Israel was right. But so nobody's really spoken about the Iranian people. So what does their future hold? And can they hope for peace at last?
All of us and I, we should fervently hope for that, because in all this, Iranian people have been the greatest sufferers. In the past 30, 40 years, no people endured such pain and suffering with such bravery. No people suffered more. No people paid a heavier price. Imagine innocent young college girls merely saying that a bit of exposure of hair in the hijab is not a terrible crime. Please give us some freedom. They were being brutalized and killed. Imagine innocent, ordinary, peaceful citizens killed by the tens of thousands merely because they're protesting about the economic conditions in the country and a quest for nuclear energy, and for that let the people go hungry and without medications, without any future. You want bombs because you want to destroy Israel, and that became the overwhelming obsession. And the way they were butchered, they suffered enormously. Now, if the regime still survives, if Iranian people continue to suffer the way they did, but if America and Israel get the advantage of ensuring that there's no nuclear threat, it will be a great tragedy for the Iranian people. The world may heave a sigh of relief if Iran regime stops exporting terrorism or promoting overtly terror groups. It may heave a sigh of relief if Iran does not become nuclear, does not threaten any country, Arab countries or Israel, with nuclear bombs. But Israel, the Iranian people may still get no relief. So I fervently hope, whatever is the final resolution of this, it will make life for Iranian people a little better, and they will be freer, and their economic conditions will improve. They can lead lives of dignity and hope for some prosperity. But again, it depends on the way it evolves. But right now, it's not for sure, because I don't think anybody seriously is talking about that. Even if the bombing leads to weakening of the regime, unless there is an organization of the infrastructure to capture that moment and then create an alternative which can take over without anarchy and violence or a civil war, there will not be regime change. United States and Israel made it abundantly clear they don't want to put their soldiers at risk. Therefore, they're not going to put the feet on the ground. They're not going to conquer physically. There is no instant of a government collapsing and peacefully an alternative emerging without anarchy and violence, without external boots on the ground, or without internal strength of the resistance forces, the opposition forces, to be able to counter those in power. So the only really possibility is not a probability. The only possibility is if the key leaders of the Iranian revolution, the Ayatollahs, themselves have a change of heart and they decide to change the trajectory of future Iran and come to terms with that, that is the best outcome. But there's no evidence to suggest so far that in the Iranian leadership, as it is constituted to a revolutionary guard or the Ayatollahs or whatever, there is that kind of a possibility happening. So we'll have to keep our fingers crossed. Iranian people must be the most worried lot right now, because no matter what happens, if their lives are not going to get better, merely getting rid of a dictator who is about 87 years of age, 86, 87 years of age, it's hardly a relief if it's a continuation of the regime, but by a different phase, which probably will last a few more decades.
Well, sir, thank you for your time, and we hope that the people of Iran have a peaceful and prosperous future. This is all for today. Thank you.